Hi everyone and welcome for another apitherapy video. This time we'll be talking about springtime. Yes, here in Quebec, in Roxton Falls where I live, because that will change pretty much everywhere around the world. We just had our first harvest of pollen of the year 2 days ago. So of course it was Salix Discolor, a type of willow tree that is actually in bloom right now. You know, it's those little fluffy buds, you know, they give a lot of pollen, and that's it. They are giving it now, so the bees harvest that pale yellow pollen on those trees, and that's just awesome. Why are the bees really going on that pollen now in spring? And they really want it. They want it. It's crazy how much they work for it, because they have been going through winter time where there's almost no flower. Well, there's no flowers here, so very they were just counting on their own reserves, food that they stored, so the honey and also the bee bread that they stored. So they counted only on this for a long time, and actually they have a really strong good bacteria life in their guts, in their whole digestive system. And through the winter that tends to go down a bit because they don't have new pollen all the time. It's less active. They don't feed it all the time with fresh pollen and so on. So there's less of those bacteria reproducing, and so there's less of this. And this is important because you know that positive bacteria, like good bacteria in our intestinal flora, is extremely important. Same thing for bees. So that's why they just go on that pollen right away, because they need to build that up. Because you know that intestinal flora, it's true for us, it's also true for the bees. The healthier it is, the stronger, the healthier will be our immune system. So this is all connected, and that's very important when we finally get out of winter. And for here in Quebec it's very long. Well, we have an urge to feed our intestinal flora. For some people, they do take really great care of their intestinal flora even in wintertime. They eat, for example, fresh frozen bee pollen. That will be a great source for your intestinal flora year-round, including wintertime, because it's frozen. So that's great. But for anyone that is just, you know, eating stuff that is, you know, that has been preserved and that lasts for a really long time, and it doesn't really have so much of that probiotic effect that the fresh frozen bee pollen have, well then, of course, same thing for us. Our own intestinal flora is going down. It's true for the bees, it's true for us as well. And by the way, that's a little trick for apitherapy. That early pollen that the bees are collecting right now from willow trees, from that Salix Discolor here in Quebec, it contains less of that probiotic effect, less lactic ferments than pollen that the bees will collect later on in summertime, in midsummer, end of summer. That pollen there will contain way more lactic ferments. Why? Because the bees always put some of their saliva on that pollen. That's how they actually impregnate that pollen with those good bacteria. And so since their own reserve of those good bacteria is lower, well, their saliva contains less. So that first pollen will contain less of that probiotic activity. So it has other really good positive qualities, that early pollen. There's a few things that have been already studied that make that willow pollen better than others for some properties. But when we talk strictly about that probiotic effect, it will have less, because it's that time that the bees need to increase it. They use that pollen to increase it slowly, but it will take time before they build fully again their intestinal flora, have all those bacteria in abundance, so that they then can put more on the pollen and have better food for themselves. Same thing for us as well. for our own intestinal flora. So just saying, when we come out of springtime, we need to take really good care of our intestinal flora. For anyone allergic to gluten, for example, well, they know about that intestinal flora problem really well, and they understand really well what I'm talking about. So if you do have a problem with gluten, for example, of course I do suggest for you to try out fresh frozen bee pollen. That would be really beneficial for you because you're actually taking great care of your intestinal flora. And again, fresh frozen bee pollen is a complete source of food, so you will of course benefit greatly from it. So in springtime, we think specifically about our gut's health and our intestinal flora. Thank you very much for listening, and see you another time for another apitherapy video.